When Grace, a hard-working single mother, brought her little boy to work at the mansion, she expected judgment, maybe even anger. But the millionaire boss's shocking gesture changed both of their lives forever. This is a story of dignity, compassion, and the unexpected bond between a powerful man and the family he never thought he'd need. Grace Williams moved like a shadow through the grand hallways of the Miller estate, her hands steady and practiced as she polished the marble floors and dusted the endless shelves of imported books. To most, working as a live-in housekeeper for one of the wealthiest men in the city might seem like a dream job. To Grace, it was survival. Every paycheck went toward rent for the modest apartment she shared with her son Noah, groceries that always seemed to vanish too quickly, and the never-ending costs of raising a child alone after losing her husband in a tragic accident 3 years earlier. She kept her head down, worked without complaint, and hid the exhaustion that clung to her bones. The mansion was vast, cold, and intimidating, but Grace endured it because she had no choice. That morning began like any other, until her phone rang at dawn. It was the babysitter, stammering apologies explaining she couldn't make it. Grace froze, her heart hammering. She had no relatives nearby, no friends she trusted to watch her son on such short notice. Panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't skip work. Mr. Ethan Miller was not a man who tolerated excuses. He was powerful, intimidating, and known for his sharp tongue and colder heart. Missing a shift could cost her everything. With trembling hands, she glanced at her 7-year-old son still curled up on their small couch. Noah stirred awake, rubbing his eyes with tiny fists, and whispered, "Mama, what's wrong?" Grace forced a smile, though her heart was racing. "Nothing, baby. You're coming with me today, but you have to be very quiet. No running around. No exploring. Promise me." Noah nodded eagerly, sensing the seriousness in her voice, though his curious eyes betrayed his excitement. To a child, a mansion was not a workplace but a world waiting to be discovered. They arrived at the estate just as the sun began to gild the rooftops with pale light. Grace hurried Noah inside through the back entrance, her stomach twisting with anxiety. She led him to a small utility room near the kitchen, dimly lit and smelling faintly of detergent. Kneeling before him, she cupped his face in her hands. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be just down the hall. Don't make a sound." Noah nodded obediently, clutching his toy car for comfort. She kissed his forehead, whispered a prayer under her breath, and hurried off to begin her duties. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Grace scrubbed countertops and straightened rooms, her ears straining for any sound that might betray Noah's presence. But children are not built for silence. Curiosity burned in Noah's chest. The muffled ticking of a grandfather clock lured him from the utility room. Step by cautious step, he crept into the hallway, wide-eyed at the chandeliers glittering above him and the massive portraits glaring down from gilded frames. To him, it felt like a castle. He wandered past velvet drapes and polished banisters, until a door left slightly ajar caught his attention. Pushing it open, he found himself in a study, lined floor to ceiling with books, the smell of leather and oak heavy in the air. Seated behind a massive mahogany desk was a man Noah had only heard about in hushed tones, Ethan Miller. Sharp suit, steely eyes, and a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. Ethan looked up from a stack of papers, brows furrowed. "Who are you?" His voice was low, commanding. Noah froze, clutching his toy car like a shield. Before he could answer, Grace rushed in, her heart dropping into her stomach at the sight. I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller," she stammered, pulling Noah protectively against her side. "Please forgive us. He wasn't supposed to leave the room. My babysitter canceled last minute and I had no choice but to bring him. It won't happen again." Her words tumbled out, desperate, as she braced herself for the inevitable. She had seen Mr. Miller dismiss staff for mistakes far smaller than this. Ethan's gaze shifted from Grace to Noah. The boy's wide eyes shimmered with fear, his small shoulders drawn up as if awaiting punishment. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unbearable. Grace's palms grew clammy. She imagined packing up her few belongings, telling Noah she'd lost her job, explaining how they'd pay next month's rent. The thought made her throat tighten. Finally, Ethan rose from his chair, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the room. He stepped toward them, his expression unreadable. Grace lowered her head, ready to accept the blow to her livelihood. Ethan's voice cut through the air, cold and measured. "Pack your things," he said, pausing deliberately, his eyes locked on Grace's, sharp as glass. "We need to talk." Grace's breath caught, her vision blurring at the edges. Her worst fear had come true, or so she thought. Grace's heart pounded as she stood frozen in Ethan Miller's study, waiting for the inevitable storm to fall. She tightened her grip on Noah's hand, ready to beg if she had to. "Mr. Miller, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I had no one else. I know I should have told you, but I was afraid. He won't disturb you again, I promise." Her words spilled out in a rush, heavy with desperation. She had faced struggles before, but never the possibility of losing the one job keeping her afloat. Ethan studied her, his face carved from stone, unreadable as ever. Then his gaze shifted to Noah. The boy, nervous yet polite, shifted his weight, but did not hide. Instead, he looked up at Ethan and softly said, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to make trouble." Something in Ethan's chest stirred, a faint tug he hadn't felt in years. This child's humility, his respect, was unexpected. Instead of barking orders or dismissing them, Ethan's voice came out calm, almost detached. "Next time, don't hide him. Let the boy stay." Grace blinked, stunned. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had braced herself for anger, yet what she found was permission. She nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "Thank you. Truly, thank you," she breathed, pulling Noah close. Noah smiled shyly, and Ethan noticed how the boy, even in his nervousness, whispered a quiet, "Thank you," once more. The simple courtesy reminded Ethan of a boy he once had been, a boy who never learned such manners from a father because there had never been one around to teach him. Later that afternoon, as Grace dusted the library shelves, she heard Noah's laughter echo down the hallway. She turned and nearly dropped her rag at the sight before her. Ethan was walking beside Noah, pointing out the tall shelves of books and listening intently, as the boy spoke about the stories he liked. They moved together through the hallways, past the art gallery and into the garden. Grace followed at a distance, astonished at her employer's patience. Ethan slowed his stride to match Noah's, his expression softer than she had ever seen. By the time they reached the stables, Ethan was showing Noah how to feed the horses, and Noah's eyes glowed with wonder. Grace stood by the doorway, torn between gratitude and disbelief. For years, Ethan had been known for his distance, his cold demeanor. Yet here he was, letting a child hold his sleeve and asking him questions. When dinner time arrived, Grace prepared herself to eat separately in the staff kitchen as always, but Ethan surprised her once again. "Grace," he said, firmly, "bring Noah to the dining room." The dining hall was a space Grace had only ever cleaned, never entered as a guest. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and the long polished table stretched like something out of a dream. Grace felt out of place, clutching Noah's small hand. Ethan, seated at the head, motioned for them to sit. He gestured not to the far end, but right beside him. Noah looked to his mother for reassurance, then carefully climbed onto the chair. The sight made Grace's throat tighten. Dinner passed slowly at first, but Ethan soon began asking Noah questions. "What's your favorite subject in school?" he asked, his tone not commanding but curious. Noah answered softly. "Math, sir, but I like drawing too." Ethan chuckled lightly, something the staff almost never heard. "That's a good mix, numbers and imagination. You'll need both." As the meal continued, Ethan leaned in, asking about Noah's dreams, his favorite, books, the stories he liked best at bedtime. Noah grew more confident with each answer, his small voice filling the grand hall. Grace sat silently, overwhelmed, her fork unmoved on her plate. She had never expected this man to take such interest in her son. The night ended quietly, but Grace's mind raced long after she tucked Noah into bed. She replayed every moment. Ethan's patience in the garden, his gentleness at the table, the way his sharp features seemed to soften when Noah spoke. It was as though a hidden part of the man had awakened, one she never imagined existed. As she passed Ethan's study on her way back to her room, voices drifted through the door. She froze, leaning closer, and realized he was on the phone. His voice, usually firm and detached, now carried a weight of contemplation. "I don't know," he said slowly, as though choosing each word with care. "But maybe this boy can change things for me." Grace's breath caught, her hand pressed to her chest. She stepped back silently, her mind racing. Change. Things? What could he mean? For the first time in years, she felt both hope and fear stir within her. She had no idea what Ethan Miller intended, but she knew their lives were no longer the same. Weeks slipped by, and what had once been an accident became a quiet routine. Grace no longer hid Noah away in utility rooms. Instead, Ethan himself had instructed her to bring the boy whenever necessary. To Grace's astonishment, he went a step further. He had one of the spare rooms in the mansion converted into a study space just for Noah. A small desk, shelves lined with children's books, even a globe sat waiting for him. When Noah saw it for the first time, his eyes widened with wonder, and he whispered, "Is this really for me?" Ethan only gave a brief nod, but Grace noticed the faintest smile tug at his lips. From that day on, Noah became a regular presence in the grand estate. Mornings were filled with lessons Ethan insisted on teaching himself. He sat with the boy at the chessboard, explaining strategies with the same seriousness he used in business meetings. "Every move counts," he told Noah, his voice firm but patient. "Think 3 steps ahead." Noah listened intently, eager to learn, and Grace often found herself pausing in her work just to watch. Later, Ethan began introducing Noah to concepts most children his age would never hear: basic finance, saving, investing. "Money is like a seed," he explained one afternoon. "Plant it right, and it grows into something bigger." Noah soaked it in, his admiration for the man clear in his eyes. Ethan also gave the boy freedom. On weekends, he took him to the stables, lifting him onto the back of a gentle horse and walking alongside him as Noah clutched the reins. Grace's heart swelled at the sight, her little boy laughing freely, looking up at a man who guided him with care. It was the kind of fatherly presence Noah had missed since her husband's death, and though it pained her to admit it, she was grateful Ethan was filling that void. As days turned into weeks, Grace found herself speaking more to Ethan than she ever imagined. One evening, while Noah was bent over his schoolwork in the study room, Ethan asked about her life. At first, she hesitated, unsure if he truly wanted to know. But his eyes held no judgment, only quiet interest. Slowly, she shared her story, how she had married young, how her husband had been her anchor, and how his sudden passing left her with nothing but bills and a son to raise. She confessed the nights she had gone without food so Noah could eat, the mornings she cried in silence before putting on a brave face. Ethan listened without interruption, his gaze steady. When she finally stopped, embarrassed by how much she had revealed, he only said softly, "You've carried more than most ever could, and you've done it with strength." But not everyone in the mansion saw things the same way. Whispers began to circulate among the staff. They muttered in hallways, casting sideways glances whenever Grace walked by with Noah. Some said she was using her child to gain favor with the boss. Others hinted she was overstepping boundaries. Grace heard enough to feel the sting of humiliation, though she tried to hide it from Noah. One afternoon, she entered the kitchen and fell silent as two maids quickly ended a hushed conversation. She knew what they had been talking about. Her chest burned with shame, but before she could retreat, Ethan walked in. His sharp eyes darted from Grace's downcast face to the maid's, and in a voice that brooked no argument he said, "If I ever hear another word spoken against Grace or her son, you will no longer have a place here." The kitchen fell silent, and the staff bowed their heads. Grace, stunned, could only whisper a quiet "thank you." Ethan's care extended further still. One evening, after dinner, he handed Grace a sealed envelope. Inside was paperwork arranging private tutoring sessions for Noah with one of the city's top instructors. Fully paid, no conditions. Grace's hand trembled as she read the details. "Mr. Miller, this is too much," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't accept." But Ethan cut her off with a firmness that left no room for argument. "This boy deserves opportunities I never had. Don't call it charity, Grace. Call it an investment in a future worth building." Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the truth. Ethan wasn't treating her son as an obligation, but as someone he believed in. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Grace lingered in the living room, watching as Ethan sat quietly across from her. His usually stern features softened as he looked toward the staircase where Noah had disappeared moments before. Finally, he rose, walked over, and knelt to take Noah's small hand in his own. His voice was low but steady, carrying a weight that struck Grace to her core. "You're not just Grace's son anymore," he said gently. "You're family to me, too." Grace's breath caught, her heart racing. She stood frozen, speechless, as the meaning of his words sank in. For the first time in years, she felt something stir deep inside her, something she had long buried: hope. Grace often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her small room in the mansion, torn between gratitude and unease. Ethan had given Noah opportunities she never dreamed possible: a study room, lessons, tutoring, even the kind of fatherly guidance that money couldn't buy. But the more he gave, the heavier Grace's heart felt. She feared people would say she had taken advantage of his wealth, that she was using her child to gain favor. Even when Ethan defended her from gossip, the shame lingered like a shadow. One evening, she found the courage to voice it. "Mr. Miller," she began softly, "you've done so much for us. I don't want you to think I'm taking more than I deserve." Ethan, who had been reading by the fire, set the book down and looked at her firmly. "Grace," he said, his voice steady but kind, "this isn't pity. It's not obligation. I care for Noah because I want to. I care for both of you because you matter. Don't question what's real." His words settled into her heart, silencing the doubts that had plagued her. Life in the mansion seemed to find a rhythm, until one afternoon, the routine shattered. Grace was at work when the call came from Noah's school. Her boy had collapsed during recess, running a fever so high, the teachers panicked. Before Grace could even grab her coat, Ethan was already at her side. "I'll drive," he said, urgency in his tone. The ride to the hospital blurred past, Ethan's knuckles white on the steering wheel as Grace clutched her son in the back seat. He barked orders at the staff on arrival, demanding the best doctors, refusing to leave Noah's side. Grace, watching, the fear etched across his usually composed face, realized just how deeply he cared, not as an employer, not even as a benefactor, but as someone who loved her child. Hours later, Noah lay resting, his fever finally breaking. Grace sat at his bedside, her eyes raw from tears. Ethan lingered in the doorway before stepping inside, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "I thought I'd lost him," he admitted, his voice rough, almost broken. Grace looked up, startled by the vulnerability in his expression. It was then that Ethan began to speak, not about business or wealth, but about himself. He told her of his childhood, of a father who had been rich in possessions but absent in love, a man whose approval he never earned. When his father died, Ethan inherited the empire but not the warmth of family. "I built walls around myself," he confessed quietly. "I thought being cold was strength. But that boy," he gestured toward Noah, asleep under the blankets. "He tore them down without even trying. He gave me something I thought I could never have, a second chance at family." Grace's throat tightened. She reached across the hospital bed and took his hand. "You've given us more than I could ever thank you for," she said, her voice breaking. But Ethan shook his head. "No, Grace. It's Noah who saved me. He reminded me of what I'd forgotten. He reminded me of love. When Noah recovered," Ethan's gestures grew even larger, not in extravagance, but in meaning. One morning, he called Grace into his office and handed her a stack of documents. At first, she thought it was another tutoring arrangement, but her eyes widened as she read. Ethan had established a scholarship fund in Noah's name, one that would provide education for countless underprivileged children. Grace pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Why?" she whispered. Ethan's answer was simple. "Because no child should have to fight as hard as you both did. Noah's name will carry hope, not just for him, but for others." Tears spilled freely down Grace's face as she realized the depth of his commitment. This was no longer just kindness, it was legacy. The final transformation came not in grand announcements, but in a simple evening around the dining table. Unlike the cold, echoing dinners of the past, the room now felt warm, alive with laughter. Grace sat across from Ethan, Noah between them, chattering about his day. The table was filled with food, but more importantly, with something Grace had thought, forever lost, a sense of belonging. Ethan lifted his glass, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "To family," he said, pausing as his gaze moved from Grace to Noah. "The one we're born with, and the one we choose." In that moment, the walls of the mansion no longer felt like barriers. They felt like shelter. Grace reached for Noah's hand and he squeezed hers tightly, a smile lighting up his face. Ethan leaned back, content, as if the long years of loneliness had finally found their cure. Grace thought bringing her son to work would cost her everything. Instead, it gave her and her little boy something priceless: a home, a future, and a family they never expected.